program for the ACLU of Massachusetts, and for 100 years the ACLU has been defending and working tirelessly to protect civil liberties and civil rights for everyone, chief among them are voting rights.
Come on, people, mass vote, then mass purg.
Good afternoon, everyone. Cheryl Clyburn Crawford, the Executive Director of Mass Vote. Mass Vote is a statewide voting rights and issue advocacy organization, and we were founded by a small group of community leaders to fight for political, racial, and economic equality with the mission to increase voter turnout, modernize election laws, and engage the next generation of leaders.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Janet Dominitz. I'm the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Public Interest Research Group, and I'm here with Christoph.
He's muted.
You're muted, Christoph.
Yeah, there we go. Sorry about that. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christoph. I'm with Mass Student Perks today. I'm a sophomore at Tufts, and I'm working this summer to mobilize the youth vote and voice.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Beth Wong. I'm the director of the Massachusetts Voter Table. We work with 23 partner organizations across the state to increase civic engagement among voters of color, young people, renters, naturalized citizens, and low-income people.
Hi, I'm Nancy Brumback. I'm the legislative chair for the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts. And this bill that we're celebrating, or law now, is an extension of the drive for improved voter access that the League of Women Voters has been doing since 1920. And we're happy to add this law to our 100th anniversary celebration. Us in the ACLU at 100 years.
I'm Christina Mensick. I'm the Assistant Director at Common Cause Massachusetts. We are a good government watchdog and democracy reform organization. We've been doing this work for a little less than 100 years, but since the 1970s. And just a quick note, we are recording this, and please hold your questions till the end or put them in the chat.
And finally, this is lawyer Sophia Hall. I'm a supervising attorney at Lawyers for Civil Rights. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan law firm in the Boston, Massachusetts area that provides free legal representation, education, and support to communities of color and immigrant communities. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alex Salakis, and I'm the Policy and Communications Manager at MassVote.
Well, thank you, everyone. We're just going to quickly go through, we're going to introduce next the chairs of the Election Laws Committee, and then do a quick analysis by a couple of our members on what the bill contains, next steps, and then have questions and answers from the press. We hope to get you out by 1:30. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce two champions of election reform. First is House Chairman of the Joint Election Laws Committee, John Lawn from Watertown. John was the original sponsor of the legislation the coalition introduced a couple of months ago, and he has been a real champion for these issues and has been a wonderful partner engaging all of us, town clerks, and all sorts of others. John, and then I'll go to Senator Finegold.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you, Pam, for the introduction and for your help along the way. First, I'd like to thank my Senate co-chair before I thank anyone. He has been a great partner to work with, someone who has a great deal of experience in election laws, but someone who I just found very easy to work with, and someone who was just committed to producing a bill that would provide safe elections for all of our voters here in Massachusetts this fall. So I do want to give a great shout out to Senator Barry Finegold for his work and his commitment to try to give this voice to every voter in Massachusetts. So thank you, Senator Finegold. And to each and every one of you for your help. And I know many of, we heard from so many of you, and especially, spoke to Pam and Barry probably 4 or 5 times each a day for for many, many weeks trying to come up with a good bill, and I think we did that. So I think it was so mentioned to me, of all committees at the State House, there's certain expertise people have in certain areas, whether it's financial services, insurance, or healthcare. But one committee that everybody has a comment on, especially of our colleagues, is election laws. Everyone's been through an election. They have an opinion on it. And I think the committee did a great job of working with our colleagues and understanding what was something that we could produce that would have consensus. I know we were worried about having a divisive issue, and I think we avoided that and came up with a great bill. So I just want to thank all of you for that, and especially Pam for your work in getting us that the information that we valued and we could trust. And as she mentioned, also we did work very closely with the Clerks Association, the city and town clerks, because we understand the enormous burden that they're going to have this fall on trying to provide for a safe and fair election. So again, thank you, all of you, for your help and support to get it this far, and I was pleased to see it signed yesterday by the governor.
Thank you, Representative Lawn. Next, Senator Barry Finegold is the Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on Election Laws, a post he's actually held a couple of other times. We were very lucky to work with him in 2014 to craft the last sort of major omnibus reform that included early voting and online voter registration, audits of election reform, an update on the inactive voting procedures, and more. He's a great ally and our senator from right here in Andover, where I am speaking from.
There you go. Well, thank you, Pam. And I also want to echo, what Chairman Lawn said, that, of my many years of serving in public life, there has never been a more difficult, a more trying time to do these last 4 months. I mean, we're figuring stuff out that we've never had a thought about in our whole life. So it really took every single person on the Zoom call to make this happen. Your advocacy truly matters. And to have the partner that I did in Chairman Lawn on the House side, it's much harder to get bills done now because just the emotions are very high. People are very stressed out. It's not an easy time to try to govern. But like I said, to have the partnership we had in the House, to have the partnership we had with the Secretary of State's office, the governor's office. I mean, we sent him the language weeks ago, and that's why I believe he signed it so quickly. So really has been a great partnership. But I actually will say to all of you that the easy work was just done. The hard work now really begins, where we need to get the message out that the reason why Chairman Lawn and I and all of you worked on this legislation is we don't want a single person to be disenfranchised because of COVID-19. And in period, we don't want anybody to disenfranchised for any reason. So we have an experiment going on here. We're going to say to people, do you want to vote by mail? Maybe that is the best way to do in the future. So we need to look at and hopefully encourage as many people to vote by mail as possible. Should we keep voting early in a primary? For the first time on August 22nd, people are going to be able to vote early in a primary. We need people to participate in that if we want to keep that. And then finally, there are some things we're doing here that are pretty unique. We're getting rid of potentially the second checkout table. Should we keep that moving forward? Should we give as much time to count ballots after the election? Should we have this, hopefully we have a portal and we can build on it. So as much as I want to applaud all of you for the great work you've done, and I mean it, that I think I've spoken to almost every you individually, we have more work to do. And what Pam was saying is that, I asked to get back on election law. I love this committee because to me, it's one of the most important things that we can do in government is have people participate, and we should never, ever take it for granted. But, in 2014, we did audits, we did, online registration, but we need to do so much more. I know we all want to do same day. That didn't happen, but we have to continue to push for that. We want to have more options online. We want people who have disabilities to be able to have easier voting. So there's so much more we need to do, but I just want to thank all of you for stepping up the way you did. Once again, I want to thank, the Speaker, the Senate President, especially my co-chair, John Lawn, and Pam, and the rest of the group for stepping up the way you did it. And like I said, let's have a good election year coming up, but come 2021, we have much more work to do.
Thank you, Senator. Couldn't agree more. So next we'll just go through a little bit about the bill. Obviously it won't be exhaustive, and there'll be an opportunity to ask questions at the end. First we'll have, and folks, if you could just follow each other. First we'll have Cheryl Clyburn Crawford from Mass Vote about mail ballots and online portal, then then Nancy Brumbach, who is the legislative chair of the League of Women Voters. She will be speaking about early voting and voter registration changes, and then Rasan Hall about in-vote from the racial justice coordinator at the ACLU will be speaking about in-person voting, including polling place consolidation. So let's take it away, folks.
Great. So although this bill is not perfect, it has clearly moved the needle for now. You know, the legislation recently passed will be making vote by mail widely accessible. Starting around July 15th, the Secretary of State will mail every registered voter an application to vote by mail. That is, every voter that is registered by July 1st. For those that update their registration after July 1st, they will receive a vote by mail application from their local election official. And if for whatever reason you do not receive a vote by mail application, you will be able to print one out from the Secretary of State's website. And with that one application, you may request a ballot for both of the 2020 elections coming up in September and in November. All application and ballot mailings will include prepaid postage, limiting the burdens placed on our voters. And lastly, by October 1st, the Secretary of State must implement an online portal for voters to request a ballot by mail.
Thank you. And Cheryl, this law allows in-person early voting before the state primary for the first time. We trust it will not be for the last time. And it also expands the in-person early voting period before the November election. So in-person early voting before the primary is August 22nd to the 28th. And for the November election, in-person early voting is October 17th through the 30th. In-person early voting must include some weekend hours under this law. Early voting by mail is available as soon as the election officials get the ballots to send out, and no excuse is required. Then the voter registration deadline has been changed in this law to 10 days before each election. It has previously been 20 days before each election. So the early voting, the registration deadline is August 22nd for the primary election and October 24th for the general election. People can still register online on the Secretary of State's website, can download an application and send it to their city or town election officials, or register in person at their local election office.
Thank you, Nancy. The ACLU of Massachusetts is proud to stand with our partners in the Election Modernization Coalition on this important day. We're extremely thankful for Chairs Finegold and Lawn for their efforts at spearheading this law. This bill will help us avert some of the disasters that have impacted communities around the country by enabling Massachusetts voters to cast their ballots through the mail, temporarily bringing us in line with at least 34 other states. And we trust this will give us a solid footing to continue to modernize our electoral process. As we encourage every eligible citizen to register, apply for an absentee ballot, or cast that ballot through the mail or vote early for the September primaries and the November general election, we also encourage every municipality to ensure that if there are any consolidation of polling locations or closures of polling locations, that they are done in a way that does not have a disparate adverse impact on access to the polls on the basis of race, national origin, disability, income, or age. Voting in person is still extremely important, and there will be people for any number of reasons that will still be able to go to those polling places. And we've seen too many stories from across the country about closing of polling locations that have had racially disparate outcomes. And so municipal officials must do everything they can to balance public health and racial justice and avoid making decisions that disenfranchise already marginalized community. And so the ACLU and our coalition partners will be paying very close attention to this.
Thanks, Rasan. Beth Wong, who's the executive director of the Massachusetts Voter Table, will now talk about some of our next steps.
It's so important that we took this important first step in safeguarding our elections this fall through the passage and signing of the Safe Elections Bill, and we really thank the leadership of Representative Lawn and Senator Finegold on this bill. We want to make sure that no voter has to choose between their health and casting a ballot. That's why we're going to be launching a robust public education campaign, and why we will be working with our partners at Common Cause, at the ACLU, at Lawyers for Civil Rights, at the League of Women Voters, MassPerg and MassVote, and many others to continue our efforts for election protection. We also look forward to working with and collaborating with local elections officials to make sure that any changes in polling locations are well advertised and well promoted, especially to voters of color and low-income voters. And we will also make sure that we are able to recruit a younger and diverse pool of poll workers this fall.
Thanks, Beth. I would just quickly augment that to say there is a nonpartisan voter protection hotline that Lawyers for Civil Rights and Common Cause and many of the other groups on this call have been part of. It's 1-866-OUR-VOTE, and that will be live. We'll have poll monitors roving and all sorts of other efforts to ensure that people's vote is protected. So this is a wonderful step. There's a lot more to do. Public education, springboarding, as Senator Finegold said, into some permanent changes. And there's a lot more details in the bill that we did not cover. And I'm sure that the press has many questions. So let's move to the question and answer period now. And then if you have a question, please either write it in the chat or raise your hand, and we will call on you from there. And if you just have a phone number, that'll work too. Did I see Chris had a hand up?
Yes, I did. Just a quick question for the lawmakers or any of the advocates here. Secretary of State Galvin said today that he won't be able to send out applications for the primary by July 15th until the legislature approves funding for the bill. I'm wondering if this will have an adverse impact on voters, and for the lawmakers, does it place any new urgency on the COVID-19 sub-budget, which includes funding for mail-in voting?
Well, I would just say that I do expect the COVID sub-budget to get done very soon, but I'd also add that the Secretary does have money from the CARES Act, and in my opinion, does have the money to send this out. We're not talking a huge amount of money to do this. So in my opinion, he does have the money, and I hope he will send them out expeditiously.
I would just like to add to that, and I think Senator Finegold and I probably will catch up after this call to make sure we communicate to people that we do believe the funds are available. It is in the Senate sub-budget. As you mentioned, we expect to have passed soon, so we don't anticipate that be a problem, but we maybe should work on a statement together about that today.
Yeah, and I'll just add that our state has $8.2 million from the CARES Act that can be used for this purpose and is dedicated to COVID-19 elections preparation. It cannot be used for anything else. And although there is need for election equipment and the like, we have other money the federal government has allocated for that. So this is exactly and precisely what that money was prepared for. And if the Secretary doesn't follow what the regulations call for in some of these, you can stay tuned for us for some next steps. Other questions? Nick.
Hi, yeah, so my question, I know obviously there's been, by expanding early voting, the intention is to make it safer to do in-person voting. But in terms of, I guess, protections at the polling places, does this bill have anything, just making sort of, I guess, the physical action of going into a polling place safer?
Yes, there is required social distancing, personal protective equipment for our election officials, and regulations that will be forthcoming from the Secretary of State. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to ask on those, what are the regulations that he has to sort of decide on?
Well, ways to, oh, John, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Just in the bill, there is in-person voting public health safeguards where the Commissioner of the Department of Public Health and the Secretary of State will promulgate emergency regulations requiring the health safeguards for in-person voting. So they will be working on that together to come up with, so which will, you know, obviously physical distancing, face coverings, protective, personal protective equipment, frequent use of hand sanitizers, and also sanitary use of marking pens, which is all in the bill.
But specifically what that will be, we do not know. You know, how many people, the outline is in the legislation, but this is regulations that the Secretary needs to promulgate.
Right. Is this something that you think that the legislature will also have to allocate funding for?
No, I do not. I think this is something the CARES Act is covered, and you could, some of it you could argue is even potential for HAVA money, which is a separate pot of federal money. I don't know if the two legislators want to comment on that, but.
Yeah, I mean, we understand that we do have, basically, for lack of a better expression, we have an unfunded mandate reimbursement policy where if we deem something that is deemed an unfunded mandate to a local community, we're going to have to reimburse them. So I would expect this falls under that category. So, you know, I fully expect that, you know, at some point we're going to have to help out our local communities, but we are getting, you know, a decent amount of money from the feds, and hopefully we can pass that along to our local governments to, you know, help for things like PPE.
Great, thank you.
Other questions?
Pam, you might just want to explain HAVA for a second, because not everybody may know that acronym.
Okay, so Massachusetts has a couple of pots of federal money that have been allocated to our state for use in elections. The first, I said, HAVA is the Help America Vote Act, which is now close to 20 years old. Massachusetts has over $40 million in a bank account allocated for election use. That would be for equipment, for training, or for data systems. So part of the question of whether some of this stuff could be considered equipment or not. That is to be spent at the direction of a committee that the Secretary of State establishes. Massachusetts has the most amount of HAVA money left in the country. Most states have fully spent their funds. We are saving it for a rainy day, but guess what? It is raining. It is pouring. This is the time. Other questions? So will absentee ballot be forwarded to a new address from Rich? Yes. You can update your information until 10 days prior to an election. There is a process for doing that. If you have, for example, this application, you can update your registration as you can do that. It's forwarded. I'm not sure exactly what you mean, Rich. If you mean it's a postal form, that probably will not be forwarded. They have to do it as part of the application process or online voter registration. Does that answer your question? Anyone else want to throw down on that one?
That's correct. Pam.
The one thing I would add, and this is Alex Salakis, the Policy and Communications Manager at MassVote. The important thing to add is local election officials, everyone is going to be facing unprecedented circumstances and unprecedented burdens. So there is a chance that you will request an absentee ballot and not receive it. That's just a fact. There is a chance you will not receive an absentee ballot application just because more people are requesting something than ever. So it's really important that voters individually remain vigilant. You know, they can go online and print that ballot application and request it. And, you know, if they don't receive that ballot, then they can go to the polls early voting or on election day proper. And it's really important, you know, when you move to update your registration, because then you will probably receive that absentee ballot application. You know, local election officials, legislators, advocates, everyone's going to be working as hard as they can this fall. But voters really need to remain vigilant as well for this to be the strongest election possible.
So my question was actually the mailing sent out by the Secretary of State. It's going to be sent to the registered mailing address, voter registered address of a particular person.
Right.
So if that person has moved, let's say between last election and this election, will that absentee ballot be forwarded to them, or is this a do not forward thing coming out of the secretary? Because that would be a trigger to tell people they have to re-register. They got that.
So they do have to re-register anyway. When you
No,
move,
I know that. But my question was, will this get mailed to their new address?
if they have changed their voter registration.
Okay, that's, yeah. So if they change it, then it'll be sent there. Okay.
Correct.
And the other thing is the application, it's 2 weeks in advance of the mailing is the deadline for updating your registration. So to get it at the proper address. And we will be working as a coalition, as well as the bill does direct the secretary to do public education. It doesn't specify what that means, but we have a lot of work to do in educating people what they need to do to vote this fall, because a lot of things have changed, various deadlines. Some of them we advocated for. For example, for the first time, Massachusetts will join 17 other states that for all of their elections allow voters to return mail ballots that have been mailed or postmarked by election day and actually count them after the fact. And the reason why we pushed for that was because it is, the Postal Service is slower, and people don't think about mailing their ballots until it gets kind of later in the process. And if you were primarily voting in person, you just go to the polls. But that's not an option for many of our voters who need to be very careful about their health and to be able to cast a ballot safely from home.
And so the one other piece to that is you can mail your ballot or you can drop your ballot off on election day at a polling location.
Or a drop box. That's the other thing this legislation creates is secure drop boxes that every community will need to deploy. How many is also, I think, going to be up to the communities, but that is also an expense. But those have been very effective in other states that do more vote by mail than we do in order to provide another opportunity to ensure your ballot gets to where it is going and not have to worry about the Postal Service. Other questions?
There's one in the chat, Pam.
There are no penalties, Chris, that would, a court could conceivably, enforce that deadline in some way, but no. Typically, you don't have penalties in a piece of legislation if it's presumed that the government will do what the legislature tells it to do.
But if he is unable to get those ballots out by the 15th, as you know, that gives us less time to really connect with our constituents. So we're really hoping that the Secretary of State pulls it together and gets the ballots out by July 15th so that we can ensure that all of our people, our communities, get it, understand it, mail it back. You know, timing is everything. And we need everybody doing what they need to do when they need to do it, including.
Other questions? Comments? Okay, well, all of us are available by phone or email. You probably received an advisory, and we are standing by if you do have more questions. Thank you again to Senator Finegold and Representative Lawn for this great bill and for joining us today. We really are very appreciative of your work, and I think that it will do well for the voters of Massachusetts. They owe you a great debt of gratitude. Thank you, and thanks everyone for coming. Let us know if you have more questions as you think about all of this.
Thank you.